The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz. Normally, Melanie Bleckel would be here with me, sharing the stage and the set. Unfortunately, as we tape this on January 22nd, she is out of town on business. I am, however, I can't talk tonight either. She's gone. My train of thought is gone. I'm very pleased, however, to welcome in her stead Paul Esslinger from the Oshkosh City Council. He's going to be my guest host this evening. Paul, welcome. Thank you for pinch hitting.
Thank you for having me here.
It's nice to have you here in a different capacity for a change.
Yeah, usually I'm on the other side of the chair.
Yeah, you're getting grilled usually.
Right, yeah.
Being grilled this evening, however, is one of 6 school board candidates running for Oshkosh School Board. We have had the other 4 of the other candidates on the air already, and you've probably no doubt seen those shows. But there are a total of 6 candidates running for school board. The primary will be held on February 17th here in Oshkosh. Dennis McHugh is not running for re-election, so his seat will be available. Current board member Teresa Thiel, her seat is up for grabs, and she is seeking re-election. Ted Sehmer, however, is joining us this evening. He is making his second bid for school board. Mm-hmm. Well, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you.
And we should also say for the viewing public that Don Sween is the 6th candidate who's running in this primary. We did invite Mr. Sween to appear on the show. Unfortunately, his schedule didn't allow him to make one of our taping dates, so we have assured him that if he makes it through the primary, we'll get him on during the general election or prior to that. In any event, thank you very much again for being here.
Thank you.
And why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for the Oshkosh School Board.
Okay, let me tell you first why I'm running. I have a personal commitment to public service and volunteerism, and throughout my adult life I've worked to improve public education, first as a public school teacher and then as a school administrator in Beaver Dam and also here in Oshkosh. So if I'm elected to school board, I would be able to continue helping to improve education. About myself, I've been married to Julie for 37 years. We have 3 sons who graduated from Oshkosh West High School. We moved here when all of them were in school. And I have a daughter who's in special education at West. I also have a granddaughter who's a 1st grader at Sunset, and I have a grandson who will be a kindergartner next year at Sunset. I want to say that the education my children have gotten, all 4 of them in the Oshkosh schools, has been excellent, and all 3 of my sons are now adults, and they've earned university degrees, and they were very well prepared. And all of them happen to be in the computer field right now, which is kind of interesting.
That is.
I think it's important for people to know a little bit about the candidates that they may want to vote for. I grew up in Milwaukee of a real working class family. Both of my parents had to drop out of high school during the 1920s to help support their families. Like a lot of people in Oshkosh, I'm 58 years old and born slightly after World War II. I heard all the stories of the Depression and the impact certainly that had on my parents. And they certainly told us about all those bad times. I certainly had it much better than they did, but that also instilled in me a work ethic and certainly being frugal and making sure that when I finally got into public education that I was spending the taxpayers' money wisely. I attended public school in Milwaukee, Keefe Avenue for those who grew up there, and graduated from Boys Technical High School at the time, which has girls since then, and now is Bradley Tech. And I really liked printing, so I got into printing, which is now called graphic arts. I went on to become the first person in my family to graduate from college. As I said, my parents had to drop out of high school, and I worked part-time in the printing industry to help put myself through school and summers even after I started teaching. I started teaching in Waukegan, Illinois for 2 years, and then Beaver Dam for 15 years as I was graphic arts and photography. And the interesting part of that is I worked with what I call the great middle students, not the gifted and talented, not the students at risk, but that great middle. And what I discovered through my years in education is these are the students who really need programs like vocational education, which graphic arts is a part of. But unlike, say, the parents of gifted and talented students, they don't come to school board meetings to defend these kinds of programs. I'll talk a little bit more about my position and why I would be an advocate for this type of student, many of whom go directly into the workforce or to technical colleges rather than to universities. I came to Oshkosh in 1984 as the vocational director, and for some of your old-timers or in the 40s and 50s, I succeeded, and I don't use the term replaced, Everett Marg, who many of you knew if you grew up in Oshkosh. And Everett Marg was the father of the co-op program in Oshkosh. And I succeeded him, and I administered that program, among others, for about 17 years. I figured that with about 150 students, seniors at both now Oshkosh North and Oshkosh West, that there's been over 5,000 people who've gone through the co-op program over the years. It's been a very valuable program. If you look around the state, Oshkosh is one of the few communities that still has it. And that's one of the advantages of having large high schools, is you have a variety of things for your students. Now, as I said, I started working in a central office here in 1984, a little bit before the time of Jim Henderson. And one of the things that I did is I started off as a full-time vocational director, but I kept on picking up jobs. I talked about my history of having a childhood which is fairly frugal. And I know there's a lot of criticism of people that work in the public sector that they don't know the value of money. Well, I can tell you that I took a lot of pride in how I was a steward of the taxpayers' money during that time. And one of the things I did is I kept on taking on more responsibility. So by the time I was here 5 years, I had, in addition to being vocational director, I was a director of transportation, a director of special projects. And it turned out that that was the responsibilities of the equivalent of 2 full-time people when I started. And after I left, they actually split up my job to 2 full-time people again. So anybody who has an idea that all public servants are free with purse, I'd like to dissuade that, at least in my case. Some of the things I was able to do and why I feel I can really be beneficial on the school board is I worked extensively with parents on boundary line issues, building issues, busing issues. I've developed all the school district's enrollment projections for about the last 15 or 16 years, so I have real expertise. And I know of all the issues and all the concerns of parents. Now, the last 2.5 years since I've retired, I've watched as various proposals have been made for closing Webster Stanley and closing Perry Tipler and reconfiguring the grades of Jacob Shapiro and Smith, and also of Lakeside and Jefferson. And I have some concerns about that I'd like to get into. Since I've been retired for 2 years, one of my volunteer positions is to provide cable access television on a volunteer basis for some of the surrounding townships. In the city of Oshkosh, you're served by Time Warner Cable, but in the towns of Algoma, Black Wolf, Nakai, and Amro are served by Charter Communications, who you work for.
I know, right.
And they have one cable access channel. I was able to convince the town of Algoma Town Board to develop a contract with Oshkosh Community Access Television to record many of the programs that the people in Oshkosh get to see, particularly government programs such as the school board, city council, Winnebago County Board, candidate forums, parades.
Eye on Oshkosh.
But Eye on Oshkosh is not part of that. I just kind of, either you contacted me or I contacted you, because it's very.
I think the staff here at OCAT kind of put us together somehow.
And I think we had over 200. Another 2,500 subscribers that got to see your program. And when it comes to, especially a lot of people who work in the city appreciate, Paul Esslinger was just telling me that the city council meetings are seen even though they can't vote on anybody because they live in the townships. And most of those townships are part of the Oshkosh School District, and all of them are part of of Winnebago County. So those are the types of things I've been doing.
Okay. Well, you know, you're no doubt aware of the financial condition that the district is in, and the struggles that the board has recently gone through to get a budget passed and so forth. As a past administrator and as a former educator, sitting watching the school board meetings, have you agreed with, in practice, the things that they have cut, the things that they have left in place? If so, why? And if not, what would you have done differently?
In general, I agree, because they use the process I agree with. You may have heard about the onion approach, where you look at the outside and the inside, the things that you have to keep. For instance, the core of education is the teacher in the classroom. And the core of that is the basic subject areas, followed very closely by the academic subject areas, which I believe are vitally important. One of the terms you hear being bounced around the school board meetings at times when they talk about cutting things or even adding things is the term enrollment-driven staffing or non-enrollment-driven staffing. And I created these terms a number of years ago when I was administrator there. Enrollment-driven staffing is strictly teachers in face-to-face contact with children and some required special education aides. Everything else, if you're going to, what you do is you create the number of positions to serve the number of children. Now the number of positions is going down because enrollments are going down, but that's the first priority. But administrators, secretaries, custodians, maintenance people, guidance counselors, gifted and talented, all of that are people who do not have direct contact with students. So if you have to make cuts, that's where they have to be made. I believe that the school board and the administration working with the school board very carefully looked at everything, and the cuts were painful, but I believe they generally were done right. Would
you support, and I'm going to give Paul a chance here, but I would just kind of want to follow up on that for a second. Would you support cutting additional administrators if need be then?
Well, I was at the last board meeting on the 14th, which is last week Wednesday from this taping, and a number of scenarios were put out. And I think we've been through most of the hoops where the Assistant Superintendent Brett Kaufman indicated there is a scenario within the state taxing limits where you do not have to make cuts for 2004, 2005. And they did a kind of a straw vote of the 7 school board members there. 4 of the members indicated that they would support that. That would be a very minimal tax increase. One school board member, in addition to that, wanted to cut about $400,000, and another one, two of them more than that. I would support, I would be another vote in favor of keeping the status quo and not doing any more cuts, because you can for next year.
Sure, but if we got to a point where it became, where we didn't have that option that,
right,
that they're proposing, would you be willing to look at cutting administrators?
First of all, you have to look around and see what you have left. There aren't that many left. Mm-hmm. If you look at state statistics, the number of administrators per pupil is way below the state average. There aren't that many left.
Well, I just know, I'm sorry, Paul, I just want to follow up on this a little bit more. I know in Neenah, for example, they have, there are a couple of schools where they have a shared principal. Mm-hmm. You know, would you entertain that kind of a concept at all?
A number of years ago, we had quite a few shared principals, and the schools that were shared a few years ago were Sunset and Oak Lawn. They were Smith and Jefferson, and they were Lakeside and Green Meadow. Now, during the days when enrollment was increasing and the booms of the 90s, I was a little skeptical of this, but there was a lot of parent pressure to make sure that you had a person in the building full time. I felt you couldn't afford to do it, but that's exactly what happened. There was a lot of pressure. And some of the schools, the parents understand that you can't have a full-time principal, but what they were looking for is having a full-time person who was a principal and perhaps did some other duties. For instance, at Emmeline Cook at one time, I'm not sure if this is true anymore, that person was responsible for a portion of the Gifted and Talented program. Mm-hmm. Now, if need be, that probably would be one of the areas I would look to maybe going back to. Although you have eliminated one principalship because Sunset is now in the Perry Tipler building, so that the principal for Perry Tipler is also the principal for Sunset. Also, because of budget cuts, I guess last year, maybe the year before, both Lakeside and Green Meadow each had principals who also did some teaching, and now one person is a principal for both of those schools again.
Okay. Go ahead, Paul.
Ted, we are taping this on January 22nd, and in today's paper, there was a mention about a check for $40,000, and there really wasn't a lot of meat to the story, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity. In the paper, it said you had received some check for $40,000 that was cashed, that wasn't yours or wasn't supposed to be, and there was some confusion about that. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to just explain that, if you wanted to explain that.
Thank you. As I mentioned, my parents are very frugal, and one of the things is they live for their children and their grandchildren. So years ago, when my sons were young, my mother made some investments for all of her children and grandchildren in a company, and it was listed in the papers, Primerica. And she told me about it at the time. I kind of forgot it on some cases. But about 6 years ago or 5 years ago, she had started to have a series of strokes. And I became her...
executor?
Well, what do you call that?
Power of attorney?
Power of attorney.
Okay.
So I started going through the safety deposit box and found these things which I had forgotten about. And I gave them to my children. And one of my children decided, well, let's see what it's worth. So he called this company, and he found, they were told on the phone it was $40,000, but he couldn't cash it, even though he was an adult, and it was in his Social Security number. It was invested in his name under Uniform Gifts to Minors and my name. That's why my name shows up in these court records. So he thought it was quite high. Didn't think Grandma was quite that generous. So we got the paperwork, and I filled it out because I had to, and we mailed it in, and they sent him a check. Well, he did that all in good faith, paid off a number of student loans, which he would not have done if he didn't have this money. Well, it turns out that about 3 months later, they wrote a very nasty letter and said, you got to pay this back. You got this money in error. Well, my mother had had 3 or 4 strokes by this time, and she didn't remember any of this stuff. So I kept asking for proof, asking for proof, asking for proof, and finally over the course of a year, they gave me proof at the same time they decided to sue me. And that's why it's in the court record. So immediately when I had the proof, I made arrangements for them to borrow some money, and we paid it back. So the case has been settled.
Okay.
So, but I guess I'm confused. If it was her money, why were you all not entitled to it? I don't understand that.
Well, we were entitled to a couple $1,000s, not $40,000. It turns out that it was worth about $2,000, not $40,000. They had made a mistake at Primerica.
Okay.
They thought there was $40,000 in the account. Instead of apologizing and saying, hey, let's see what we can do, they were just very rude about it and then never offered any evidence.
And since your son had called earlier and they had told him $40,000 also, when you got the check then you just assumed that everything was kind of copacetic.
Well, not only that, he filled out the paperwork. It was a couple weeks. It was probably even close to a month since the time he called on the phone, and they just did a major screw up.
Okay.
I got one other quick question.
Sure, go right ahead.
Some months ago, I think it was about a year, maybe even a little longer, there was quite a to-do about the Oshkosh-OASD Indian logo, and the board spent hours and hours and hours of time on that issue. I guess just briefly, if you had been a school board member, was that a waste of time, or was that something that needed to be done, in your opinion?
I really studied that issue. I was a student, a graduate of UW Stout, and so are 2 of my children. And then you had the Menominee Indians. This is western Wisconsin, west of Eau Claire, where UW Stout is located. And they had a real uproar in that community when one person suggested that you eliminate the Indian logo, and it kind of tore that community apart. Now what they ended up doing is that there was a recall election of some of the school board members who had voted to get rid of the Indian nickname or Indian logo. And they decided that they would have 2 referendums. One was of the community because it was such a major issue, and one is of the students. And it turned out that both the community and the students, almost like 70 or 80%, decided that they should keep the Indian logo. Had I been on the board at the time, I listen to all the arguments, but I would have made a suggestion that we go to some kind of an advisory referendum. I know that people think that every issue should be decided by the elected representatives, but I think this is a hot issue. If the board would not have gone to that referendum, I would have voted no.
Okay.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk during this campaign, Ted, about conflict of interest. You know, we've got a sitting school board in Teresa Field, a
Right.
school board member, who's married to a teacher in the Oshkosh School District.
Right.
Mr. Sween, who is a candidate this time around, is a retired teacher. You are a retired administrator from the Oshkosh Area School District. Candidate Ann Rumbuck is a current food service employee. However, she's said publicly that she will resign if she's elected because she does see a conflict of interest. Not only are you a retired administrator, but you're also currently working as a consultant for the district.
Well, I have worked as a consultant.
Okay, you are not at present time then?
Well, I get called in, I have been called in periodically to do
Okay.
enrollment projections.
Okay.
The last time I did that was last May.
Okay. I was just going by what was in the most recent OCAT newsletter that is still sitting out in the front
Right.
office, which says that you are. So I apologize if that was incorrect.
Well, and if Dr. Heilman is interested in having me do enrollment projections again, and it doesn't seem to be a conflict, I'd certainly be willing to do that.
From your perspective, do you see any conflict on your part, and will you be able to vote on every issue?
I thought about this issue, and there's only one that I can think of. As a retired administrator, and this is true of a lot of private business, a lot of government, I will be, my family and I will be receiving benefits, which as far as medical and dental, until I hit Medicare. Now, but according to John Sprangers, and they checked a legal opinion on this, I don't know what it is for teachers, but at least for administrators, once you retire, a promise is made and they can't change the benefits. However, if they change a provider, I probably couldn't vote on that one issue. That might be one thing in a whole term, and that's it.
Okay. Would you ever vote to cut the budget in order to pay for retiree health insurance?
Well, once people have been retired, you don't have any choice as to what you do. Things are locked in.
Mm-hmm.
Ted, if you look at the makeup of the school board now, is there any one member or members that you would say, I align myself with him or her or that group? Is there a group? I mean, is there a liberal group and a conservative? And where do you think that you would fit in with that group right now?
I think I'm very independent. One of the things is I have been an insider. I am not an insider anymore because I've been gone for 2.5 years other than doing enrollment projections for the district. I don't have much contact with people in that office. Occasionally I get a phone call on busing issues because not everything has been written down. But I would say one of the things you have with me is you'll have somebody who's been there, who knows how everything operates, and I think I can be most of value of asking the kinds of questions that other people may not be able to ask, because I do have a background in education. Now, admittedly, it's mostly secondary education, but I also have, I probably know all the boundary line, enrollment projection, demographic issues in busing better than anybody else even 2.5 years later, so I can ask a number of questions. And after we got into some of the controversies over possible closing of Webster Stanley as a middle school and Perry Tippler as a middle school, and Dr. Hammond was talking about adding some busing, moving elementary kids, or having elementary kids move to other certain middle schools, say transport middle schoolers from the Washington area down to South Park. I reminded them, if you do that, you start setting some precedents, you may not save money at all. So I do have a certain kind of expertise that I don't believe anybody else has.
Okay. We're down to just like 5 minutes left. I can't believe how fast this time goes. You were recently quoted in the paper as saying that while new ideas for school building use needs to be addressed, those talks need to be done in a way that it doesn't upset the public. Why do you think that people have gotten so upset about those kinds of issues, and what would you do in order to kind of quell their concerns and their upset?
Okay, I have an idea, and I tried this a number of years ago. You may recall that when I did enrollment projections maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when Bob Kellerman was still a principal of North High School, he was concerned because the projections show that about 10 years out, North High would have about half as many students as West. And we started some committees, and one thing I did, and I would like to propose, right now, Dr. Heilman is encouraged to present proposals. But because of the types of things that have happened with proposing the closing of Webster Stanley as a middle school, Perry Tippler as a middle school, a kindergarten through grade, this grade configuration, a number of schools, I think a lot of people, when you hear the word proposal, immediately get defensive. And as a result, they think, well, the superintendent makes a proposal, the school board, whether it's true or not, they think, well, the school board members are just going to be like sheep and do whatever he says because he's the one that's leading them. I propose another way of doing it. Keep throwing these terms around. I'd like to say that we have to encourage the superintendent and his staff to continue to provide ideas that are educationally sound and that make sense. But when you present an idea, you state immediately, this is an idea for consideration. We're going to go out and talk about it among a number of groups. And we're going to honestly list all the pros and honestly list all the cons. And we're going to give a number of options. But option number one is always to do nothing. So that hopefully, if you keep driving this, people will feel comfortable. I was at a PTO meeting at Green Meadow School the other day, and I'm concerned because listening to parents, there were 3 times they were concerned about, oh, we don't even know what the futures are for our school next fall. So to add to that, I want to say strongly to you and your audience, I want to see a moratorium on talking about closing schools or changing grade configurations. It really bothers me when I sit and watch replays of school board meetings, when parents have to come up to the table and talk to the school board and be angry or frustrated that their children might have to go to a different school just because somebody has some idea that maybe we should make these changes.
Okay.
And it really bothers me when they say their children are crying that they may not be able to go to school with their friends anymore. Now, we've done this, about this for the last 2 years. I can tell you that with my experience in the school district and knowing all about the boundaries and busing and the fact that we're having declining enrollment, that we could have a 2-3 year moratorium on talking about this stuff and let people feel secure that their children are going to be going to the schools they're going to now.
Okay.
Now, there may be some little boundary line changes, but let's stop talking about closing schools and reconfiguring schools.
Okay.
I do have a couple other issues if you don't, at some point, before we run out of time.
Well, we're out of time. We're out of time. I have time enough just to invite you to look into camera 3 over here and tell people why they should vote for you during the February 17th primary. And also, and you've only got about 45 seconds, Ted, so
okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay, as an educator for 34 years, I know what works and what doesn't work. I know what Oshkosh parents want and what they don't want for their children. I also know which questions to ask, particularly on educational issues, boundaries, busing, and future building needs. And I'll bring these experiences on behalf of students, parents, and taxpayers.
Okay.
If any more or not?
Well, if you have an email address and a phone number where viewers can contact you.
Okay, my email address is Sehmer, S as in Sam, EHMER @VBE.com, and my phone number is 233-7823.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for being here. Sorry the time was so short, but half an hour goes like it just goes. We are going to be right back, and when we do come back, we'll be joined by Tony Palmeri, who's going to talk with Paul and I on our take on the candidates running for Oshkosh School Board. We'll be right back.
Good evening. Follow me, please.
Imagine what America would be like today if Martin Luther King never had a dream. Help keep the dream alive. To find out more about the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C., call or log on now.
Oshkosh Community Access TV2 is your local sports channel. Follow your favorite Oshkosh teams each week as CATV2 presents the high school game of the week. Besides football and basketball, we feature soccer, gymnastics, swimming, wrestling, and volleyball. Sundays at 8, Mondays at noon, and Wednesdays at 8, CATV2 is the place to be for high school sports. The high school game of the week, here on Oshkosh Community Access TV2.
I want to
Have an impact.
make a difference.
I want my voice to be heard.
Take matters into your own hands.
smack down your vote for the candidates who represent you and the issues you care about. Make time on Election Day to vote in elections in your community.
Have an impact.
Make a difference.
Let your voice be heard.
To learn more about the candidates where you live, contact the League in your state or community through lwv.org.
Smack down your vote on Election Day.
The Friends of OCAT is a nonprofit group that supports Oshkosh Community Access Television programming and facilities. The Friends sponsor membership, underwriting, and fundraising projects. Their mission is to provide quality programming, to plan and implement fundraising activities, to develop a supportive membership, and to raise awareness of OCAT. If you would like to become a member and support Oshkosh Community Access Television, buy an OCAT card and enjoy discounts at many local businesses. Thanks for viewing OCAT.
Hi, and welcome back, everyone. As the conversation goes on here, I'm Cheryl Hentz, and for those of you just joining us, Melanie Bleckel is out of town on business as we tape this on January 22nd. I'm very pleased to welcome two distinguished gentlemen. To my right is City Councilman Paul Esslinger. He's been serving during this show as a guest host. And to my left is Tony Palmeri from Commentary and also the Communications Department at UW-Oshkosh. And Tony is joining us this evening. You were a guest host on two different shows, 4 candidates for school board, and so we kind of wanted to just sort of chat about the school board race and the candidates, where we see it going and so forth. What's your take on the candidates, Tony? I mean, what's, you know,
well, first of all, I want to say I'm really pleased to be here with you and Paul. I can't think of 2 more dedicated public servants in this community, so I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you very much.
You know, it's interesting that Paul can probably identify with this. I think the Common Council has a couple of different pairings on it. People that seem to be very pro-administration, almost uncritically so. People that ask lots of questions to the point where they almost get in trouble with administration sometimes.
Pain in the butts, I guess.
Yeah, and the school board seems to have those similar divisions. I mentioned this on one of the shows that I co-hosted, that you've got you know, Mrs. Thiel, Mr. Kavanaugh, that tend to be very pro-administration. I bet if we looked at their votes, we'd see them pro-administration. Then you've got Mr. Schneider, I think Mr. Becker, Mr. McHugh, that tend to be not anti-administration, but they seem to work from the premise that
you better explain something to me. And it better be facts.
Yeah, and in this race that we're looking at now, you've interviewed now 5 candidates, right?
Yes.
Five out of the 6. Mr. Bowman is someone that seems to be able to cut over into either side of that. He kept talking about a kind of accountability model, as you might recall. We know a lot about Teresa Thiel and where she stands. Karen Bowen coming back after 1 year out of the board, and she obviously has a very pro-administration type of slant, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. And Mr. Sehmer was an administrator, and I think he just told you, you know, his view on administration and so on. Right. But we got to talk about Ann Rumbuck, because we're taping on January 22nd. And a story broke in the paper today. Maybe you can, or one of you can, summarize it.
Well, I'd be happy to summarize it. You know, one of my thoughts, my notes were written prior to this story breaking. You know, I had felt that though she's a relative newcomer to the political scene and not as polished in expressing her thoughts and so forth, I felt that, you know, she's done a lot for the district with the PTO and stuff, and I thought that her heart was in the right place, and that's what my notes reflected for the show tonight. And then in this morning's paper breaks the story that I'm going to paraphrase some of this. She was convicted and served 18 months probation for a Class A misdemeanor in 2000 for, according to the paper, stealing 273 pounds of ham and 2 cases of cheese balls from the store where she worked as a delicatessen manager.
That's a lot of ham.
That's an awful lot of ham. and I, you know, I don't even want to begin to wonder what she was doing with all that ham and those cheese balls.
Well, clearly,
but you know, and again, well, there must be an explanation, and I wish that this had broke before we had her on the show, because we could have asked her to address it.
And we gave Ted the opportunity to speak on what happened to him.
And you know, what I am going to do is I will call Ann, and I am going to put, just for the audience's benefit, I will be putting, I'll ask her to address these things. I'll put it on the website, because obviously she's not in a position now to be able to address it, and it wouldn't be fair to invite her back if we're not going to be able to invite the other candidates back, and frankly there's just not that much time.
I mean, I almost wish the story in the paper had been a little, I think with the Sehmer you said there's not meat in the story.
Yeah, just
there's a lot of meat here though.
There's a lot of ham in the story.
There's a lot of meat here. And it gets worse though, if I, you know, just let me finish this for a second. Let's see, then it goes on. Let's see, she was convicted of writing worthless checks in 2001, and again, this is all according to the newspaper. I haven't seen these records at all, but according to the Oshkosh Northwestern, was convicted of writing worthless checks in 2001 and was sued last year by the Girl Scouts of the Fox River area for non-payment of a bill in 2003. Just a few days prior to our taping this, she was sued by a doctor, a small claims suit for over $330. In June of 2003, it says she was taken to small claims court again by the Girl Scouts of the Fox River area for payment of over $800 worth of cookies that were originally paid for with a check with insufficient funds. She was convicted of a Class A misdemeanor in 2001 for writing a worthless check from a closed bank account to an auto body facility here in town. You know, and there are a couple of others here. I mean, this just...
And they only basically quote her as saying that, well, we all make mistakes, it's time to move on. Well,
mistakes are made, we know that, move forward. It looks bad for myself, but that's how I've had to deal with it. It's all the past, I look to the future. And this is the part that didn't restore any of my confidence. And, you know, I think Ann was a very nice person. I mean, you interviewed her with me. However, this didn't reassure me about anything. She says having personal financial difficulties would not impact her ability to make spending decisions on the school board because, quote, obviously the board members don't hold the district's checkbook. You know, I don't know, guys.
I'm interested in
that
what Paul thinks
doesn't
about all
reassure my confidence.
I don't know anything about the school board, so. I mean,
but you do know about being a good steward of public money.
I would hope so, yeah. But I mean, I guess for a candidate to say that they're not a steward of the checkbook for whether it be the council or school board or whatever county board, I would disagree with that and ask for a little more explanation on that. I guess.
I mean, she doesn't need any advice from me, but if she asked for it, I'd say, look, if you want to stay in this race at this point, you better write a long letter to the paper explaining the conditions under which this happened. I mean, if let's say she was in dire poverty and it was either I steal the food or my kids go hungry, I think people could possibly understand that. But we don't know. I mean,
well, we don't know. And the other thing is that we have all seen what this newspaper does. They take things out of context. They don't print an accurate quote in that. Again, it's kind of got a different, the quote that they print sometimes puts a different spin on things. And that's why I am, you know, while we kind of sit here and tee-hee about this a little bit, about it being a lot of ham and stuff, and indeed it is, you know, I still want to, it is a serious matter, and I think all of us feel that it is something that Mrs. Rumbuck needs to address.
Absolutely.
And I will give her a full opportunity, because even the Northwestern is not going to allow her any more than maybe 300 or 400 words. She can write, you know, as much as she wants to explain all of these things. I will be calling her tomorrow and making that offer to her, and we'll get it on the website.
Well, the question I guess I have for Tony and Cheryl is, you know, is it something that the local media should be reporting on? Traffic violations, you know, ham, whatever the case may be. If they're not felonies, I personally think they should. But, you know, does a voter go out and vote for someone because they've had traffic violations or stealing something, or does a voter go out to vote for whom they think is going to represent their interests in the city, the school board, the county? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think that voters do have a right to know these kinds of things, even traffic violations. Now, how much weight should a voter put in that?
Right. And that's an individual.
Right,
I mean, every individual has to make that decision.
For me personally, as a voter, traffic violations. I mean, what is that? I mean, I think most drivers at one point in their adult life are going to get a traffic violation.
Right.
But when you start talking about theft, bounce checks, things of this nature, that raises a real character issue. It raises a trust issue. And again, in fairness to Ann, she just hasn't explained it, at least not yet.
Well.
Right.
Well, then I guess the second question then is, you know, with this case, it happened, say if it happened 7-10 years ago.
Right.
And the person has pulled themselves up, haven't gotten themselves in any trouble. Is that an issue? Tony, as you as a voter, if someone, you know, was dealing with something like that 7 years ago and has become a model citizen after that, is that something that you would take into consideration?
I would look at what they've done in those 7 years, and I firmly believe that people do redeem themselves, and that they could become model citizens after having some bad breaks. I mean, I think we have had, not necessarily locally, although I'm sure we've had politicians that have had some bad breaks early in their life,
sure,
and then have for whatever reason become model citizens. So yeah, in fact. If they do become model citizens, then those earlier problems almost become of benefit to them. They're able to tell voters the story of how I was able to fight my way through adversity and so on.
Because I mean, if you look at the judicial system, if someone gets thrown in jail, they have to be rehabilitated. That's part of the process. Sure. And they've done their time when they come on. And I'm not trying to make an excuse for anyone that has done something wrong, but when they come back out, you know, we want them to be part of society, and we want them to do a good job.
Right. Exactly.
And like I said, I guess everyone that goes into a voting booth has their idea of why they should vote for someone.
Absolutely.
Is she a good-looking gal? I mean, some reasons for why people do what they do are pretty crazy, but...
Are you suggesting some people vote because somebody is a good-looking person?
Isn't that why Melanie got elected all those years? That was why Melanie got elected all those years, right?
Well, I don't know. I didn't vote for her for that reason.
But I'm interested in if we can move away from the Ann Rumbach situation, I'm interested in what you two think about this primary coming up. I mean, are you prepared to rate these candidates, or did you see some of them as stronger? Did you see all the interviews, Paul?
Yes, I have seen all of them.
Okay, did you have a sense of which candidates were stronger?
Well, there was one, in my opinion, that was just heads and tails above the rest, and that was Bob Bowman.
Absolutely.
He ran once before, and that was 3, 4, 5 years ago, and you know, when you guys interviewed him, in my opinion, he just hit a home run. Because I mean, and I'm not saying I would agree with all of his issues. It's just it seemed he has respect for the electorate. He has respect for the system. I think he wants to put the time in, and I'm telling you, putting time in is paramount in a job like this. So I just didn't see anything that he fell down on in that interview. So.
No, I felt that he did an excellent job, and I think that he definitely is willing to weigh everything that a school board member or any elected official, for that matter, has to weigh in order to make a decent and what I guess I would call a qualified vote on
Conversely,
something.
I would say the one I was most disappointed with was Karen Bowen.
Why is that?
I think Cheryl just came right out and said, don't you think a message was sent at the last election when you were defeated, when you came in last, and there was something about a dove hunt had something to do with it, and I was...
Because of one of the referendum questions.
Yeah, I didn't understand that at all. It just, it seemed like she's doing it again because of Dennis McHugh. She doesn't like Dennis McHugh, and she doesn't like Ben Schneider. That's my take. I could be completely wrong.
Well, she's got issues with Dan Becker also.
Yes, and she did say that.
I'm sure she was very, very upset at losing that election after being on the board for so long. I'll say one thing about Karen Bowen that I think, depending on how the issues get talked about, one thing that might be to her advantage, whoever's on the school board in these next couple of years had better understand this No Child Left Behind. I don't know if everyone understands how radical this is. This is the largest unfunded mandate in the history of the country. I mean, the president talks great about it, and there's a lot about NCLB I like, but it's something like a $5 to $12 billion shortfall, which means that it's going to be on the backs of local taxpayers. And I think people like Karen do understand federal policy. I think she's she may not have always seemed it when she was on the board, but she is kind of like a policy wonk. She does dig deep into policy. And I think the same is true of Teresa Thiel. Now, they both got pegged as being part of that school board that couldn't come to closure, that couldn't make a decision, that wanted to talk things to death, that didn't listen to the public. And I think if people are thinking those ways, then Karen's going to have a problem. But I think when it comes to things like NCLB, I think she's got a good understanding of that, and I think that's going to be important. You know, just one thing on that, if I may.
No, go ahead.
If anyone had told us 15 years ago, when the Democrats had more control of government at the state level and at the federal level, if anyone had ever told us then that it would be the Republicans that would take away all local control of education, I mean, think about it. We've got Republicans controlling the state government, except for the governor's office, and we've got Republicans controlling the federal government. And yet we've got now almost no local control now at the school level.
And we have the Republicans down at the state that wanted to freeze the property taxes for the city council. And yet they're screaming when the blood alcohol level thing came up of lowering it from 0.10 to 0.08, you had Greg Underheim jumping up and down saying, how dare you tell me what's good for the state of Wisconsin and to hold our transportation funds, but yet it's fine for Greg to tell me and the 6 members of the council that we need to freeze our taxes because I don't know what I'm doing up there. And
when he
that's
doesn't even
trouble.
bother coming to a city council meeting to see what you guys are dealing with.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I remember, Tony, I was on your show a few months ago and you said, did you ever think about writing a letter to Greg and Carol and asking about some of these issues? And I'm going to do that. I'm going to write them a letter and say, come to a council meeting on a quarterly basis.
Absolutely.
And give us the 5 or 10 things that are going on that would pertain to the city, to the council, so we know what's going on. And I mean, these are trying times, and I've got to know this stuff.
Right.
And you know, I don't hear from them. The city residents don't hear from them. So I'm going to write that letter. And
It'll be a banner occasion if they do show up.
Yeah.
Well, they should.
Well, they should, but I don't think that they will.
Well, it's incredible. You know, some counties in the state literally hire, at taxpayer money, a lobbyist to go to Madison to tell them what's going on. And I'm thinking, why isn't the elected representative
the lobbyist?
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, Winnebago County used to have a lobbyist, and they got it out of the budget, I think, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, or maybe a little bit later than that. But the elected officials that are at the state level ought to be coming to the county and talking.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we have a League of Municipalities that I think lobbies for municipalities, like they did this whole shared revenue mess.
I mean, you know, state funding of schools. I'm sure you saw Governor Doyle's State of the State speech, or at least part of it. He's talking about refunding or rethinking the way we fund schools. Whoever's going to get elected to the school board better know something about that. And I'm not sure which candidate has the best grip on that.
Well, I don't know. I think Bob Bowman just stood shoulders and heads and shoulders above everyone else. You know, Teresa Thiel, obviously she had numbers handy of precisely how many votes she's had to abstain from, and it was something like 14 or 15. Now, we don't know if that's, I mean, she didn't say, and neither one of us asked, we don't know if that's just since this current school board was seated last April.
No, she said all of her votes. She looked up all of her votes.
All of it,
over
okay.
400 votes.
So for her 3 years in office. You know, we've covered Ann Rumbuck.
You both probably disagree with me, but I think the conflict of interest issue with Thiel in some ways is a red herring.
No, I think I would agree with that.
I think she almost got labeled as a scapegoat for some of the device misconduct. Oh, you do agree with that?
Yeah, no, I do agree with it. Because I'm myself on the council, I sell advertising. And from time to time, there's someone that comes forward that is a client of mine, and I'll abstain. You know, I can't think of anything that was a real huge issue that I had to abstain from. Now, Teresa can't, you know, vote on the budget or a great part of the budget. That's substantial. But, you know, anyone, I don't care who they are, if you take an issue on whether it be the city council, school board, or county board, you could find a conflict somewhere.
You will, yeah.
You can do it. It's just, you know, to what, and I drive the city attorney nuts. I mean, I see things on the agenda, I call him up and say, you know, where am I on this? Can I vote on this? And I think he's getting sick and tired of hearing from me.
Well, every official ought to do that, and I don't think that all officials do that.
I just want to make sure that I'm covered on it, and you know, I don't want to vote on anything that someone's going to think I'm trying to be shady on.
Well, I think that's to your credit, and I think Teresa has almost been held up as a scapegoat. One thing I'll say about her is she is in the school system. She spends a lot of hours seeing how the schools work. whether she's able to communicate that to voters, I don't know, because I'm thinking that she is still labeled as part of that board.
Well, yeah, and that I was going to comment on that. Tony, in your opinion, and Cheryl, maybe you want to comment on this. Mr. Kavanaugh, or not Mr. Kavanaugh, Mr. Stratz and Ms. Bowen last time, I think, got catapulted out.
Right.
If Teresa would have been up in that election, and there would have been someone else.
Oh yeah, she would have been.
Yeah. So I mean, do you think she's got something to worry about?
Well,
this time?
it depends on how the voters perceive what has happened since last year's election.
That's true.
See, Karen Bowen tried to make the argument when we interviewed her
that
the board now, since she has left, doesn't act on things quickly enough. Remember, they delayed the contract for a week or two.
And the charter school issue. That was the other thing.
They almost missed the vote. Now, whether in this short campaign time she'll be able to get that message out and have people below it or have people believe it, I don't know.
But see, even if they believe it, I think people are just going to say, big deal. You know, so what that the deadlines were almost missed. The guy was Dan Becker in this particular case. He was asking for additional information, and the deadlines weren't missed. And you know, that's one thing, you know, that I just want to kind of comment on as far as Karen Bowen. You know, she seems to be picking on Mr. Becker a little bit here because he was asking for additional information. Well, what she needs to keep in mind is at the time that this budget was being looked at, he'd only been on the board for maybe 7 months or something like that. That's a heck of a lot of information and a lot of numbers for someone to digest. And I think it's to Mr. Becker's credit that he asked a lot of questions rather than voting on something that he wasn't sure of, that he didn't have enough information about. That would have been, in my opinion, an irresponsible vote.
Yeah. She also suggested, I believe, that he's only on the board because he was concerned with the Webster-Stanley closing issue.
Yeah, although she mentioned that to us off camera. That didn't get out to the general public, but she did say that, yes.
Okay. And that's, well, board members have been saying those things about each other for a long time in a variety of different venues.
That will happen.
So my guess is that in the primary, the people who will come out on top will be the people who find a way to meet the most voters. I mean, it's probably not going to, well, it might be a high turnout because we've got a Democratic presidential primary.
Right. And the League of Women Voters will be doing a forum also.
Well, I don't know if they will be or not. Do we know, are they?
Yes. February 10th, if I'm,
is that right?
I think, I'm not sure. Okay. But I went to the OCAT website and they are going to be doing
okay. Well, that's good to know because I wasn't sure if they were or not. In the past, I don't think they've done candidates forums before a primary.
I think they have.
Have they?
Yeah, I think they have.
Yeah, they have. Depending on how many candidates there are, yeah,
okay.
Yeah, they've done it.
So, well, that's good to know, and then we'll at least have a chance to hear from Don Sween. But this Ann Rumbuck thing is just it's very disturbing to me, and I don't like beating a dead horse here, or a dead pig, as the case may be. But it just I wish that she had told us these things when you and I interviewed her. Why wasn't she just very forthcoming with it?
You've interviewed Ben Schneider before. She made it clear on the show that Ben has promoted her to asked her to do some things with the district. Even didn't necessarily ask her to run for school board, but sounded like he was supportive of it. You might want to ask him next time he's on.
I've talked to Ben actually about that situation. Yeah, I was talking to him today.
Did he know about this?
There's one distinction you have to make here. Ben, as he explained to me, had suggested to several people to run. It's a far cry from an endorsement.
Yeah, he did not endorse.
I mean people in the grocery store who say, I really like that. It sounds like a fun thing to do. Well, run. I don't know the person from Adam.
Absolutely.
But once someone starts getting involved and you start knowing things about them, then you can make a distinction if you want to support them or not. And Ben did not do that.
Well,
did he know about this?
No,
he had no clue.
Okay.
No, and I think the other point that needs to be made about Mr. Schneider is that, all he really knew of Ann was what she had done for the district, with the PTO and things like that. I mean, how many of us get on the internet and start snooping around in people's criminal backgrounds before we go to the ballot box on election day? And I don't think it's a bad thing that the newspaper does that. I mean, that's fine. You had asked the question earlier. I think it's fine that the newspaper does that, and I think we have a right to know, but I'm not going to beat up on her so much about some of these small claims actions because, you know, at one time or another, and I think probably all of our lives for the most part, there have been financial difficulties, and we don't know the things that surround, you know, these various small claims actions, and I guess that's why I would like her to have an opportunity to speak to it. But, you know, the theft issues and the bounced checks, especially when it's a closed account, those things are of concern to me. Right. And yeah, she absolutely needs to explain those. Yeah. Because if she doesn't, and if she doesn't do a better job explaining them than what she did in this morning's paper, she's dead in the water, I think, as far as this election goes.
I know we're down to about 2 minutes, and there's a question, very important question. This is out of respect to Melanie, who I'm sitting in for tonight. I know she wants me to ask this question to Tony. Tony, do you like the Beatles?
I love the Beatles.
Okay. Paul McCartney or John Lennon, which one? Or George Harrison or Ringo? Which?
George was always my favorite.
George was your favorite?
And John number 2. I'm not a big Paul McCartney fan.
Well, then she'll agree with you on that, because she hates Paul McCartney.
Right.
I just, that still just bothers me.
I got to say,
I'm lost. I don't know where in the world that question came from or why.
on these school board candidates, if you want to know who the Beatles fans are, no, just kidding. I would say to people, if you think Dr. Heilman and the administration is doing a good job, and you think that they should be supported, you know, almost uncritically, then I would say that Thiel, Sehmer, and Bowen are your candidates.
Right.
If you think that the administration ought to be held at a more critical standard, not that the others are not critical, then Bowman probably fits in there. And Rumbuck, I'm going to reserve judgment on now until she explains this.
Right.
Yeah, this just was not good, and really, again, she should have mentioned these things because she had to know that sooner or later this stuff would come out. And
well, I want to, you know, I mean, because 273 pounds of ham. That's. I mean, again, if a person has got a family starving, and they say, "I had no choice."
How about a local food bank?
Right, but with no information. If someone says to me, I was convicted of theft, but now I've grown and I want to move on, I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
No.
We have to know the context in which this happened. Yeah. Now, maybe she'll decide not to run rather than explain it.
Although her name at this point, I think, would still be on the ballot.
Okay.
So, I don't know, but we will, again, give her an opportunity to explain things. We'll get it on the website, and maybe there's a simple enough explanation for some of these things. I don't know what the explanation could be for ham and cheese balls, but...
You hamming it up?
Maybe it was a big Super Bowl party. I don't know. No, I don't know. Anyway, guys, thanks very much. This was fun.
Yeah, it was.
Paul, thanks for filling in. Melanie has never looked so fine. And,
jeez. You're going to get beat up when she gets back.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
I can handle her.
I really love being here.
Yeah, this is great.
It's really a lot of fun.
Love it.
Well, thanks. It's been a lot of fun. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to go to the polls on February 17th. Politics is not a spectator sport. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh. Take care.